question
a
is,
lot of
the
new
question
Supreme Court
is,
justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
will you shut up, man?
Listen,
the worst president America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
there's nothing smart about you, Joe.
Well, tonight, President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden square off for the last time on the debate stage, making one last push to sway undecided voters less than 2 weeks before Election Day. That is our in focus topic tonight: the history, format, and future expectations of presidential debates. How did they begin? Who decides on the details? And what could they look like in the next 10 years? We met with two professors of political science earlier today for an insightful discussion about this topic. Check it out.
All right, we have Richard Davis, professor of political science at Brigham Young University, here with us, as well as Juliet Carlisle, associate professor of political science at the University of Utah. Richard and Juliet, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
So I would like to start off this discussion by asking you guys, when did presidential debates become a part of our political landscape?
So really, it goes back to 1976. That was the first debate. It was between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. And then in 1987, the Commission on Presidential Debates started. So they were more ad hoc up until that time. But this goes back over 40 years. Before that, no, there were no presidential candidate debates.
Yeah, if I can just chime in, one of the reasons why is because a lot of the candidates didn't want to welcome or invite their opponent in a direct debate. Early on in history, it was seen sort of as, unbecoming to directly appeal to the voters and to attack their opponents in public. And so they oftentimes use proxies as a way of communicating their positions on issues. So it's much more of a modern phenomenon.
The Lincoln-Douglas debates are historically well known, but they didn't look like the debates of today. What were they like, and why are they important?
One of the reasons why they were important is why a lot of debates are important, notwithstanding today's debates, is because they focused on a particular salient issue of the day, which was slavery. And so we see that in a lot of modern day debates, the focus is on a lot of pressing issues that are of national importance. Their debate was actually very different. There was a series of 7 debates, and they took place all within the state of Illinois, trying to win the appeal of the state legislature and in their vying for office. But one of the important things also was that, or the distinctions between their debates and our modern debates, is not only the number of debates, but the time period for the debates. They were much longer. They were 3 hours, if I've noted that correctly. And so each candidate had 60 minutes to speak. And so this was, pretty novel at the time. And so they really could discuss and have a much more detailed debate of the issue than what we might see today.
Let's talk about how technology has changed debates. Is it correct to say that Kennedy won the election because of his televised debate performance?
So the 1960 debate between Kennedy and Nixon was really an aberration. It came about because Nixon was willing to debate, and Kennedy was willing to debate, but actually it didn't follow up until, well, it didn't follow up. It was only 1976 when we got into the pattern that we're in now. But in that debate, those who watched television, the televised debate, were saying that Kennedy won. Those who listened to radio thought that Nixon won. So it does seem that the televised image made a difference in people's minds.
That is very, very interesting. We have about 90 seconds left in this first segment. I want to talk about what is the Commission on Presidential Debates and why did they start and become the organizer of the last few debates?
So as I mentioned earlier, it was started in 1987 as a vehicle for a nonpartisan, independent debate process. And they became the organizer of the general election debates from that point on. So since 1988, they have organized all of the general election debates. Candidates have deferred to those. So they've been in the business for over 30 years now. And in fact, this is the first time, this last week was the first time that they've scheduled a debate and it did not happen. And they've not had a situation where a candidate refused to show up. So they've been very successful at organizing debates, getting candidates to be there, and presenting a debate that is well moderated and well watched by the voters.
Yeah, one of the reasons the debates are so important or valued and why the commission was formed was because of the importance that debates were seen in connecting voters to the process, you know, to really democratize the process and connect voters therein. And there were a few years before the 1987 formation of the group, that some debates were sort of questionable of whether they would happen or not. And so when there was that risk, they decided to really create an organization to oversee them and keep it an organized event.
All right, Richard, Juliet, I want you guys to hold that thought real quick. We have to take a quick commercial break. We just wrapped up our segment 1 on the history of presidential debate. When we come back, we will continue on the format of presidential debates.
I'll say it loud, and I'm very proud of it. And I have a great relationship because of what I've done with the African American community. I'm very proud of it.
One thing, if I'm elected president, you will not hear me race baiting, you'll not hear me dividing, you'll hear me trying to unify.
That was from the last time we heard from President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden at their individual town halls on October 15th. Tonight, they are squaring off on the debate stage together for the last time before Election Day in less than 2 weeks. Tonight, for our In Focus discussion, we are exploring the backgrounds and patterns of presidential debates. Before the break, you saw us meeting with 2 professors of political science earlier today for an insightful discussion about this topic. We now pick up right where we left off.
All right, we are back with Richard Davis, professor of political science at Brigham Young University, and Juliet Carlisle, who's an associate professor of political science at the University of Utah. Thank you so much again for being with us tonight. Earlier before the break, we talked about the history of presidential debate. Now we will talk about the format. So the presidential debates have changed over time. When did they change from oratory to moderated and timed?
Yeah, I think they've sort of always been in flux. I mean, we talked a little bit about the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, very different style, different number of debates, much longer, 3 hours versus 90 minutes that we have today. But they have always sort of evolved. Sometimes there's different sections or the number of segments that are covered and the amount of time given to the candidate, but it's certainly something that evolves. And I imagine when we think about, you know, how we're dealing with debates in the new pandemic, you know, the possibility that we were going to have an online debate last week might even change the format a little bit more.
So since the Commission on Presidential Debates has organized debates, they have followed a format. So they do have, the commission picks the moderator, not the candidates, although they have some veto power. The commission sets the rules, they set the dates, they set the venues, they set the time that candidates can answer. So it's, in that sense, it's been pretty standard. However, clearly what has happened this year and happened again 4 years ago was a departure basically because of Donald Trump. When he interrupted, he basically tried to control the debate, and so they've had to adjust, as they're going to do in this debate, this third debate. They have to adjust to turn off the mics to make sure that the rules are adhered to by both of the candidates, and particularly Donald Trump. So they have had to make, you know, small modifications over time in order to deal with the challenges they face.
Was there ever a time when debates were more of an exchange of ideas rather than appealing to a voter base?
I think when we talk about televised debates, we're talking about these very short, oftentimes canned, prepared mini speeches, trying to get in one-liners and jabs. I mean, that's the appeal that TV has sort of has made. That's the way TV has changed the nature of debate. So I would say the modern debate has probably always been fairly similar. Now, they still try to get in their positions, but they always do seem to try to get some sort of one-liner that can be carried throughout the news for the week.
What recourses do third-party candidates have?
Well, third-party candidates have to reach the threshold that the debate commission sets in order to participate in the process. And we've only had one, that was Rossborough in 1992, who actually met that threshold. Some of them have sued in order to get on the stage, but they have failed to succeed. So they find their own venues as they can. And it's interesting that there's been a lot of pressure placed on the Commission on Presidential Debates to lower their threshold, which they have actually done, in order to allow third-party candidates. The problem they have is they don't want to provide a forum for someone who has no chance. You know, they're getting 1% in the polls. But at the same time, they're facing this pressure that they are more inclusive. And certainly as, you know, third parties have proliferated, that pressure is probably going to intensify over time.
So the modern presidential debate forum has 4 distinct debates, one on foreign policy, one on domestic policy, a town hall, and a vice presidential debate. How are these negotiated and put together, and what input do the two parties have and news organizations have? We have about 2 minutes left in this segment.
So in terms of how they're negotiated, there's a couple of different ways they're negotiated. For example, who's going to host the debate? Oftentimes universities put in bids. We oftentimes see them at universities. University of Utah hosted the vice presidential debate on the 7th. But there's also, there's certain guidelines that they use and negotiate with the candidates. So there is some give and take early on. In terms of setting up the question, the moderator has, I think, pretty much dominant control over the questions and topics that they're going to ask.
All right, so perfect. Juliet, Richard, I'm sorry to cut you off. We can pick up right after the break. We do have to take a quick commercial break. We just addressed the format of presidential debates, but when we come back from our commercial break, we'll talk about expectations.
I hope we will have a substantive debate.
Dial down the temperature. Leaders need to help bring us together, not tear us apart.
A less contentious debate is expected tonight between President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden as they square off one last time on the debate stage in Nashville, Tennessee, less than 2 weeks before Election Day. In an effort to limit interruptions, the Commission on Presidential Debates will mute mics during the first 2 minutes of each candidate's response. Welcome back to our In Focus discussion tonight. The topic we've been exploring for the last 20 minutes takes a magnifying glass on the inception of presidential debates, its evolution, and what it could look like in the future. Before the break, you saw us meeting with 2 professors of political science earlier today for an insightful discussion about this topic. We now pick up right where we left off.
All right, we are back with Richard Davis, Professor of Political Science at Brigham Young University, as well as Juliet Carlisle, who is the Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Utah. In segment 1, we talked about the history of political debates. Segment 2, we talked about the format. And in this final segment, we talk about expectations. All right, so Juliet and Richard, do these debates actually sway voters?
Do you want me to jump in there, Richard,
Yeah,
or do you
go
want
right
to
ahead.
take this? Okay, I was going to say they oftentimes don't sway voters. By the time we get to this point in the election campaign, most people already know who they're going to vote for, because mostly what drives people's decisions is their partisan identification. And so there's not a lot of folks who are undecided voters or what we call independents. What they might do, however, is encourage or mobilize certain candidates to go out and vote. But most of the times viewers might just be affirming their already direction they're leaning.
So yeah, let me just agree with that. That there really aren't a lot of voters left. But in a close election, those voters are the ones who matter, who are going to tip the outcome one way or the other. So the candidates are doing two things. One, they're reaching out to those voters to try to get them to support them. The other is they're trying to mobilize a base. So you see that in the Trump-Biden debates, where they're trying to appeal to people who are still undecided out there, but they're also trying to say to their own supporters, hey, I'm with you. I need you to get out and participate in this process. So in that sense, they do have an effect. In a non-close election, they probably don't have much effect.
Let's talk about what happens when the two candidates are on stage together. These debates are usually the only opportunity when they are together during the campaign.
Well, what we see is how they interact with one another, how they deal with questions, how they deal with challenges. And I think the more interesting format is the town hall format, because that's where voters have an opportunity to interact with the candidates. And you see sort of how they deal with ordinary voters. I mean, it's a shame that we didn't get that opportunity with Donald Trump and Joe Biden last week, because I think that would have been very telling, how these candidates would have interacted with real voters rather than with a moderator.
What about the ecosystem around the actual debate, the spin room, the pundits? Who is benefiting from this?
I would say the media is benefiting from this. A lot of what we learn about debates is from the media we watch afterwards. And so when we think about our bifurcated media, that we have, conservative media on one side and liberal media on the other side, they're getting, viewers are getting sort of a distilled version of what just happened. They might not be super engaged, and they might need help understanding what they just saw. And they'll, in the spin room, for example, you'll have people from more conservative stations give the conservative spin, more liberal news media give the liberal spin. And regardless of what side you're on, your candidate will have been successful.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left. One final question for both of you guys. So we'll give you guys each a minute to answer this. The CPD came of age when there were only 3, maybe 4 national networks. Now, broadcast media is more fragmented and social media has a huge reach. What do you guys see in the future for presidential debates? And Richard, we'll start with you.
So that's a very good question here. And that is something that I'm sure the Commission on Presidential Debates is worried about right now. How can they reach beyond television? Because television, when they started this, television was the main source of news for individuals. That is now beginning to change. And as it does, they're going to have to find other formats to reach out to in order to show their debates on that. And I think you're going to see that they're going to be less concerned about what happens on television, more concerned about how viewers are seeing this in a variety of other modes.
And Juliet, we'll wrap up with you. What do you think about the future for presidential debates?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is, nowadays, even with social media, you can still catch a lot of the information broken apart, broken down, view it on the internet. So I think that that's going to be something that continues. But one of the things that might be of concern is seeing the debate and its component parts out of context. And that's what drives, it's a characteristic of social media, is these sort of, again, these short snippets of media that is, promoted and dispersed among the social media environment. And that could be misleading and misinformation for some people.
All right, you heard from Juliet Carlisle at the University of Utah and Richard Davis at Brigham Young University. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight on an insightful discussion about presidential debates.